Well, thanks, Shantae. What all that means is basically I've been around a long time. I've done economic development for almost 20 years now. So I started when I was about 13. I've really enjoyed this work. I'm fortunate to be able to work in this great city on economic development and mobility issues. And what I want to share with you today is a little bit about what's going on and what's hot right now. So just a little bit about what we do in economic development. Real estate development, which you may be familiar with, brownfield redevelopment, obsolete property rehabilitation program, the neighborhood enterprise zone program, and grant loan programs are just some of the things that we do underneath the auspices of real estate development. In business development, we work on business retention and expansion projects here in the city. We offer industrial facility tax exemptions and personal property tax exemptions to those companies hiring new employees and making investment in the city. With regard to neighborhood economic development, we are focused on assisting our corridor improvement district authorities, of which we have 6 in the city now. We have 1 business improvement district in Uptown, which is a special assessment. And we have contractual relationships with entrepreneurial support organizations that provide assistance to neighborhood businesses and entrepreneurs that are seeking to operate within the neighborhoods. We also do a lot of work in innovation and entrepreneurship. Our Grand Rapids Smart Zone is in place, and we administer that. We also support the MyDevice Consortium, which is a consortium of medical device manufacturers and others associated with the medical device industry. We partner with Start Garden on innovation entrepreneurship for startups and young entrepreneurs. We also partner with the Grand Rapids Area Black Businesses, which serves as the Black Chamber, and assisting what's called the Grab 5 program, where they have taken on cohorts of 5 businesses to work with throughout the year. The Ferris State University Latino Enterprise Institute, another opportunity for aspiring entrepreneurs that are Latino to experience some training and leadership. And the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, another one of our partners that puts on a variety of different educational seminars for small businesses. In the last year, we have published our results. In terms of private investment, we were $187.5 million of investment. So projects that were supported with public investment generated this much in private activity. These projects then generate potentially 117 new jobs with an average wage of over $19 an hour. And these projects we've worked on anticipate retaining 378 positions that currently exist in the city today. So of these 15 projects, 11 of those were real estate development projects and 4 of those were business expansions or new businesses to the city. In those 15 projects, we had 317 new housing units created and over $364,000 of new city taxes generated to the general fund. Those aren't funds that we collect, but those go to the general fund to support all the operations of the city. And those are in both income tax and property tax. Any questions about what we do in economic development? So what's new? Let's start with the work that we did on some policy modification. So between 2015 and 2016, we spent a great deal of time on the great housing strategies, and all of that informational context can be found on the city's website. That was a public-private partnership with our nonprofit housing developers and the general public, the neighborhoods, and working through coming up with a plan for housing. On the heels of that came what's known as Housing Now, and that took place from 2016 until present. And as a result, in 2016, we modified some city policy to incorporate some new city investment criteria to help spur some activity in the city's priority areas, those being sustainable development, income and housing diversity, quality architecture and site design, Grand River activation and access, and also promoting the utilization of transit. So what the policy amendments did was it added extra incentive for developers to take advantage of some of these things here. So sustainable development and income and housing diversity are related to having sustainable elements within a development, many of which are now required by ordinance. Income and housing diversity refers to having affordable housing, but then also having a diversity of housing types. Quality architecture and site design is just that. So improving the quality of architecture is important to the city, and so is site design as well. And then activation and access to the Grand River, certainly a priority. So anytime there's an opportunity to gain access, whether it's through public easement or other, we appreciate that and added an added incentive. In addition, the promotion of transit, so providing your residents or employees with transit passes or providing access to put a bus stop in front of a project, those are all added value to the city, and so therefore we can add an incentive to that. I won't go into the details, but certainly can reference these policies so you can refer to them on the city's website if you want to look into more of the details and see what qualifies. So good things are happening in the city, but we've learned as of late that's not true for everyone. Forbes ranked Grand Rapids 51 of 52 cities where African Americans are doing the best economically, and so this was a major blow to the city's attitude in terms of how well we thought we were doing. So as a result, we have a mayor who used her opportunity as a leader to encourage the reading of A City Within a City that outlines the Black freedom struggle in Grand Rapids, and so this kind of opened our eyes to what our history has been and how we need to modify the future if we want more to benefit from the economic boom this next time. In addition, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation issued a report addressing equity and inclusion in the city and identified what we call the neighborhoods in focus. And these are 14 census tracts in the city, which I'll show a map of here shortly. But this is where 32% of our population reside. And what's important about that is that 50% of our poverty also resides in those 14 census tracts. So we find that 32% of our population is losing population. They're experiencing the highest unemployment rates. They have the lowest educational attainment. And the future demographic of our city is going to be very different. Our Hispanic population is growing, and so therefore we have to take these things into consideration as we plan for our future. In addition, the city went through an advancing equity through inclusive contracting and procurement process, which identified opportunities where we could modify our procurement and contracting to assist more and include more in our buying. In addition, staff has gone through racial equity awareness and learning training, along with Government Alliance on Race and Equity training. So we're educating our own employees first before we ask the community to participate in this work with us as well. What's important about this is the fact that W.K. Kellogg also says that there could be $4 billion of GDP growth in the city if people of color participated in our economy. So by leaving 32% of our population out, we're losing that GDP growth, and it's critical to our future. We want to advance racial equity through strategic planning and policy making. So if there's one thing that the city can do, it's advancing racial equity through strategic planning and policy making, ensuring that our priorities involve everyone. And I think that's something that we don't always think of when we are planning as a city, but certainly the only way that we can do this is together, and the one way that the city can do this is making it a priority, which I think we'll hear more of from the city manager and the city commission in their strategic planning. So we continue our racial equity journey today. We have a lot of data and initiatives underway, and we've made a lot of recommendations. And I'll talk a little bit about our economic development strategic plan in a minute. One of the things we did last summer was we collected a lot of data, because once we learned about the neighborhoods in focus, we wanted to know more and how the city itself is participating in the neighborhoods of focus and how our public incentives in economic development are being invested as well. So this is just the cover sheet of our dashboard on our website, but you can access this, and there are nine different slides, 10 pages, one with references. This shows our population by race. It also indicates median income by race and ethnicity, and so we've disaggregated the data to show exactly what's going on here. Two things to point out. One, the unemployment rate by race is highest among the African American population, and poverty rates are highest with the Hispanic population. So we've identified some key attributes by disaggregating this by race. I would encourage you to go look at the other slides. this was very instrumental in helping us understand what impact we have on racial equity. Just to take a look at a map here, you can see 49507 is a zip code that keeps being referred to, but when you look at the city as a whole, and you look at the neighborhoods of focus in the next slide, you'll see that 49507 is just one subset of the neighborhoods in focus. So when we refer to the neighborhoods in focus, it's a much greater area than just 49507. So here in this map, the pink lines are the neighborhoods in focus, and you can see we've overlaid that on the red line districts, and you can tell that there is a clear association between those neighborhoods that were redlined and where poverty exists in the city. I've also placed on here the opportunity zones that we'll talk about in just a minute. Any questions about this data? What this does is it allows us to kind of hone in on where we need to make the most impact, and where, like I mentioned, 32% of the city's population resides, and it's 50% of our city's poverty. So some of the ways in which we're incorporating equity into our work. In transportation, we provide the Fare Free Zone for the Silver Line. Some of you may be familiar with that from Wealthy North. That is a free area where people can ride the Silver Line. Access to health care and education, those are, you know, primary concerns for neighborhoods in focus, but certainly it is also a benefit to those that are visiting the community. The South Division Corridor Plan, something that's being worked on with the Development Center and led by planning. That too will hopefully result in more access to jobs and housing along that transit corridor. I already mentioned the incentive policies with regard to affordable housing, but there's much more that we need to do in that area. In some respects, we've made recommendations about geographically targeting some of the policies and incentives to those physical geographic areas to see change. In workforce development, we're trying to promote local hiring so that when a business opens or expands, that they're hiring from the neighborhood, which then benefits our residents. And contracting and purchasing, we have a micro-local business bid discount policy that you might be familiar with. And also, we've made local millage commitments when we raise funds from millages for parks, for streets. We make commitments to spending as much of that money as we can locally. And then we track that and report back to the community. Any questions about these? There are many more, but I just listed a few that you might be familiar with and have knowledge about. All right, opportunity zones. So this is somewhat of a hot topic right now, and interestingly enough, it is a federal program. Some of the details are not yet outlined, but I'll share with you what I know. So this was a tax incentive that was established by Congress in 2017. It's now 2019, and all the details aren't fleshed out yet. And really what this is intended to do is spur long-term investment in low-income urban and rural communities. So nationally, they're identifying census tracts that are called opportunity zones, and those are designated by the federal government. And the process by which that occurred is that the states all had a recommendation of the federal government of what opportunity zone census tracts they wanted to see designated. And so our governor at the time made recommendations, and these designations remain in place for 10 years. This program is an investment incentive, not a tax credit. So it's a benefit to those that are investing in the project, not necessarily a tax credit to those that are building the project. So in Grand Rapids, each state was able to nominate up to 25% of their census tracts, and essentially the city has now 8 census tracts within its city limits, and then there are 2 in Wyoming. Each county in Michigan, I believe, has one, but there are just a select few because our state is geographically so large. These census tracts have to be designated a low-income community under Section 45DE for New Markets tax credits, so there is somewhat of an alignment with that program, again, a federally designated program. Or it has to be contiguous with a designated low-income community. So there were data analysis done to determine which census tracts could be eligible. So not every census tract in Grand Rapids was eligible. I do have a website posted here. In Michigan, the opportunity zones were overseen by MISTA, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and they were the ones that worked with the governor's office to submit the census tracts on behalf of municipalities and counties. So the map we looked at earlier, the blue lines are the census tracts in the city, and I'll point them out. So one here along the river, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And these two are outside the city limits. So these align nicely with the neighborhoods of focus, but unfortunately don't incorporate all of them. And again, these census tracts are listed on the MISTA website as opportunity zones. So how they work. This is still somewhat yet to be determined, but I'll tell you as much as I know at this point. So essentially, the investors can form what are called opportunity funds, and these are being developed across the nation as we speak. They can request a temporary deferral, a reduction, or an exemption on capital gains investments made into projects in these census tracts. So it doesn't involve the city approval or city government, other than to say the project has to go through the normal development center and planning review process. So if you're proposing a hotel for a location in an opportunity zone, it would still go through the normal review and approval process. And we certainly will rely on the master plan, area specific plans, neighborhood and business district involvement. So it doesn't get any passes, if you will, for approval. It still goes through the normal path of approval. In addition, Governor Whitmer just recently announced Executive Order 2019-8, which also offers that 3% of state expenditures should be made to disadvantaged businesses and or businesses located in qualified opportunity zones. So this is a state purchasing policy whereby she's trying to encourage the use of businesses within these low-income census tracts. So it's kind of an added benefit for businesses located there that they may be able to have an easier time seeking purchasing power from the state of Michigan. And so she's going to encourage others to do that as well. The presidential executive order that was issued in December of 2018 created an opportunity council that will drive the federal funding into these qualified opportunity zones. We're not exactly sure what all of that means, but just to know that it's there. In terms of next steps regarding opportunity zones, there's somewhat of a lot of work to be done in terms of putting together a prospectus. And the way I look at this program is essentially it's an investment and investor approach. So you have investors that are interested in investing in these opportunity zones, and the best way to seek that investment is to provide a prospectus and to talk about what is going on in those census tracts and what development opportunities might exist, what area-specific plans are in place, what vision has been outlined by the community, and how the investor can make investment that will benefit the community. Because the fear in the nation today is that those opportunity zones are going to see a lot of unwelcome investment. And while that may be true, the reverse could be true also if the community was proactive in seeking the right type of investment. So the goal would be to market the prospectus to opportunity funds that exist. And I'm not aware of any opportunity funds that currently exist, but I know that some are being formulated. There are a couple of attorneys at Varnum that are working with prospective investors, and I know that there'll continue to be activity over the coming year. The other thing we're looking for are local opportunity funds that might have the community interest at heart, and how do we leverage those opportunities for investment into these census tracts that align with the planning work that's already been done. So the important thing is to honor the plans that are in place, honor the process that's in place, and ensure that we're not seeing a bunch of unwelcome investment into these opportunity zones that don't actually benefit the residents that live there, the people that work there, or the residents that could be building or participating in that economic opportunity. Any questions about the opportunity zones?
Are we really just kind of waiting on HUD for direction from the federal government on this?
A little bit. So there are two things happening. One, we would like to proactively prepare our prospectives to outline exactly what development type opportunities we have, and that'll come as a result of some of the planning work that's already been done. So we can put together, you know, information on the demographics, the population, the income, the available workforce. All those things could be prepared into a prospectus, and then we could start marketing that to funds. In addition, we're trying to learn who has funds or who's building funds, who's operating funds, so that we can make that connection. But then, two, the federal government still plans to issue more rules about the incentive that we don't necessarily need to know all the details about, but certainly the attorneys and those supporting the funds need to know so that they can inform their investors how this will all work. But essentially, it's a benefit to defer capital gains for investors. Any other questions on that? All right, so let's talk quickly about development without displacement. There are two policies that are under this topic. One is the Voluntary Equitable Economic Development Agreements, or VEDA. This is a policy that's currently in place as a result of Housing Now, and then I'll talk about a displacement policy that's been proposed. So in VEDA, this was adopted in January of 18. It provides for three-party agreements to allow for voluntary commitments by developers around various goals related to a development project. The agreement specifies standards and conditions that will govern the development of the property, ensuring that both the community, neighborhood, and the city are partners in this agreement. So all private developments that are on city-owned property or public-private partnerships with costs over $5 million, or public-private projects that are seeking investment from the city's Affordable Housing Fund are eligible for this program, or can seek this type of an agreement. So the application gets filed in partnership with the neighborhood association. So the developer and the neighborhood association come together and apply to the city. They commit to actively engaging in a citizen participation framework, have a legal interest in the property, and aren't in default with any city obligations, or have any outstanding orders or violations, and have filed a property transfer affidavit. In addition, they commit to providing workforce information if total new employment is going to be over 15 each year, and they must be willing to comply with the equal opportunity policies of the city. So really what this is intended to do is allow projects that are of a certain size that have major impact to a neighborhood come in and enter into an agreement so both parties are essentially agreeing to doing certain things. The application fee and criteria are determined by staff, and it's really based on the amount of public engagement that needs to take place. They have to conform with zoning, and this project cannot have started prior to City Commission approval of the agreement itself. They have to be in compliance with all of our environmental requirements, fair housing practice, and be willing to support the use of a microlocal business enterprise participation plan. So these are pretty substantial project sizes and big impacts to neighborhoods. The term of the agreement would be the same as the incentive term. So the benefit to having one of these in place ensures that you will likely have better success achieving the incentive. And they have to be willing to report annually to the City Commission, maintain rental housing compliance, and if any party defaults, the agreement can be terminated. Any questions about this? We only have one example of this that currently exists, and it actually isn't a VEDA. It was something prior to this policy, and that's the agreement with the Grand Valley State University development up in Belknap, where Belknap came to the city. We created a three-party memorandum of understanding to outline what the university was willing to do, what the neighborhood was going to do, and what the city would do, and now we track all of that forward. That involved the relocation of individuals living in those properties. It involved who they were going to hire to work in the project and who they were going to allow, or what type of housing they were going to build for people to live there. So it stipulates all those requirements, requires them to meet regularly, and it really maintained a really solid relationship between the three parties to ensure that that project benefited everyone. Question? So it's not a requirement, it is voluntary, and the projects that are eligible are those that are essentially public-private partnerships over $5 million or seeking the use of the city's affordable housing fund and or private developments on city-owned property. So that's one area where the city has the ability to require affordable housing or, you know, certain hiring practices, and so certainly the city is going to want to have an agreement with any developer on their property. The benefit of the agreement ensures that they can seek public incentives for their project successfully. Because if all three parties aren't on the same page, it's not likely that incentives would be approved for that project. So the term of the agreement is just the length of the incentive. So if the incentive is 12 years long, that agreement would be in place for 12 years and we would monitor it as such. If the incentive is only 5 years, it would be a 5-year period. So regarding displacement, this is another topic that's come up as a result of developers making investment on properties that have residents, maybe rental properties, etc. We did some research with other cities in terms of how they handle displacement when developers come to them seeking public incentives in situations where people are being displaced. The recommendation for this policy is that it would apply to situations where residents are being displaced, and we would want to know prior to relocation how many residents are currently located on property they've acquired for the proposed project. They would receive a 120-day notification in advance. They would also receive notification of the monetary funds that would be available to them to locate elsewhere. They would receive that financial assistance, and then the developer would report that they've deposited the funds, and then we can make payment to those residents as they relocate. So we took a simple approach based on the research that we did, and it's based on current budget constraints and staffing. So this doesn't require any additional budget or staff. Now, if we expanded the policy to do more, we would have to have more budget and staff. So we just did it within the framework of our current budget and current staffing. The process would be that the application for the incentive would trigger the review of the project, and once we determine whether or not the policy would apply, then we would notify the applicant. The developer would then have to notify the residents. The developer would deposit those funds, and the application for incentive would begin. Then we would report the outcomes. How many individuals were relocated as a result of this project? How many received financial assistance? How many did not? Any questions about this? Again, this is just a proposal. It will go before the City Commission for a public hearing. So there'll be opportunity to weigh in. As Shantae mentioned, I presented this at the Neighborhood Summit. There was a lot of good conversation and seemed to be support for this type of an arrangement. In terms of next steps on this policy, we still need to identify a fiduciary who will collect those funds from any developer relocating individuals and what that would cost us. We need to draft the administrative guidelines and notifications so that we ensure that they are both in English and in Spanish and provided in a standard way. We need to develop reporting requirements and follow-up evaluation process and timelines. It's a very transparent process for the developer themselves. And then we will review this proposal with the Economic Development Project Team, which is the mayor and 2 commissioners. From there, if the project team is supportive, we will bring it forward to the City Commission for consideration. And at that time, they can hold a public hearing and take public comment on that policy. Any questions on that? I think this is as a direct result of us seeing more displacement of residents as a result of redevelopment, whereas in the past, most of the development has occurred on vacant property.
Is the incentive matched, like the developer's dollars are matched by the city, or is it all developer funds?
So the question about the program being matched by city dollars, it is not matched by the city. It is simply the developer funds.
The incentive is just
The incentive is provided to the development project itself, and then the financial incentive goes to the residents being displaced. So you could somewhat consider that to be a match of sorts, but it's not directly tied to the payment to the residents. All right, so real quickly, I want to talk a little bit about our strategic plan, how we move forward. These are the 5 pillars that we just talked about a little bit ago. I didn't include mobility before, but the key thread that runs through all of these is equity, and specifically racial equity. And so we're pursuing what's called an equitable economic development and mobility strategic plan. And we're going to be kicking this off soon, so stay tuned. You may have an opportunity to participate. We're going to build on the previous plans and research. So all the work that's been done will be brought in together. We will take adopted plans and other relevant and pending plans to formulate our strategic plan itself.